Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to everybody tuning in online. Yeah, this is fantastic. We're really thrilled to be here with you all, and with those of you who are joining us for the reading and panel. Who are participating. So those are, really excited for this reading and panel featuring Francisco Aragón, Brenda Cárdenas, Mauricio Kilwein Guevara, Roberto Harrison, Reina J. Leon, and the panel will be moderated by Michael Dowdy. So incredible group of humans and poets. Thank you all so much for being here. This event, so I'm gonna run through some thanks, a couple short announcements, and then we'll get this rolling. But so this event, along with the workshop that was led by Brenda yesterday afternoon, are presented as part of Latino Poetry, Places We Call Home. This is a major public humanities initiative taking place across the nation last year and into this year, directed by the Library of America and funded with generous support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and Emerson Collective. First, thanks to Library of America, National Endowment for the Humanities and Emerson Collective. Glad to be part of this much larger body of programs taking place all over the country over many months now. And then very important to mention too that these events in particular, the workshop and this reading and panel, are presented in partnership with Letras Latinas, the literary initiative of the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame, which strives to enhance the visibility, appreciation, and study of Latinx literature with an emphasis on programs that support newer voices, foster a sense of community among writers, and place Latinx writers in community spaces. So many thanks to Letras Latinas, in particular Francisco, for both being part of this event and being instrumental in making it happen. Also huge thanks to Brenda for also being instrumental in making these events happen. So. Really wonderful collaboration. Thanks. I think that's all of the thanks. There are many, maybe there are more, but I think that's all I have on my list. So if I haven't thanked you, and I should have, I'm sorry. We have books for sale by everybody, quite a wonderful display by some rather prolific writers who are joining us. So it's, please check that out. That's at the front desk in the bookstore. And then quickly mentioning just a couple of things that are coming up. I hope you'll come see us next weekend. I hope you'll come see us at the central branch of the Milwaukee Public Library for Milwaukee Zine Fest. We'll be tabling there and have had the pleasure of being on the planning committee for that for a number of years. And that is from 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. next Saturday, the 19th. And in addition to people tabling, vending, selling their zines and everything, a lot of events happening, a couple panels, some workshops, and so on, so all throughout the day. And then on the 27th of April, another afternoon, another matinee, at 2 p.m., we'll be here for Donald Ravel, who's in town. We'll be reading, in particular, in celebration of his new collection of poems, Canandaigua, out with Alice James Books. So beyond that, check our print newsletter, our website, and so on. So thank you to everyone for being here. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to the poets. We'll begin with readings, and then a series of shorter readings from several people involved. And then after the readings, we'll just quickly, it'll be a very continuous motion to just wave this podium away and bring some chairs out and move right into the panel. So stay seated and enjoy the whole flow. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is just introduce everyone at the top. Then everyone can just read and without further interruption from me. So I'll do that by way of some brief bios. So the panel moderator, so after the readings, there'll be a panel. Michael Dowdy. Michael Dowdy's books include Tell Me About Your Bad Guys, Poetics of Social Engagement, Orbilly and Broken Souths. He teaches Latinx literature at Villanova University. And then those who will be reading to kick things off, and we'll be reading in the order that I'll share their bios. So Francisco Aragón is the son of Nicaraguan immigrants. His books include After Rubén, Glow of Our Sweat, and Puerta del Sol, or de Sol. He's also the editor of The Wind Shifts, New Latino Poetry. A native of San Francisco, he is on the faculty of the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies, where he directs their literary initiative, Letras Latinas, and teaches courses on Latinx poetry and creative writing. And then after Francisco, we'll hear from Brenda Cárdenas, current Wisconsin Poet Laureate, who is the author of Trace, winner of the 2023 Society for Midland Authors Award for Poetry, and silver winner for Forward Review's Indie Poetry Prize. Boomerang and 3 chapbooks. Cárdenas has served as Milwaukee's Poet Laureate and is Professor Emerita of English at UW-Milwaukee. Mauricio Kilwein Guevara is the author of a collection of microfictions and prose poems entitled Autobiography of So-and-So, 3 collections of poetry, and a book of translations published in Madrid, Spain. His comic play, The Last Bridge, El Último Puente, received a staged reading off-Broadway with Urban Stages. His collaborative inter-artistic dramatic work, Autobiography of So-and-So, received a full production at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He is Professor Emeritus of English at UW-Milwaukee. Roberto Harrison is a Panamanian American poet and artist living in Milwaukee since 1991. He published his ninth book, Isthmus to Abya Yala, through City Lights in 2024. He has served as editor and publisher and most recently co-edited the Resist Much, Obey Little, Inaugural Poems to the Resistance in 2017. He was Milwaukee Poet Laureate from 2017 to 19. And Reina J. Leon, PhD, is Black Afro-Boricua from Philadelphia. She is the author of Lene Lenape, Ancestral Lands. She is the author of Black God, Mother, the Spotty, Canticle of Idols, Boogeyman Dawn, Sombra, Dislocate, and the chapbooks Profeta Without Refuge and Areto to Atabe, Essays on the Mothering. She is a founding editor of Echentos Review, an online quarterly and international journal devoted to the promotion and publication of Latinx arts, and she currently supports poets and writers at the Stone Coast MFA. Super excited to hear from all these amazing poets. Woo woo! All right, give it up first for Francisco. Welcome.
My thanks to Woodland Pattern for hosting us. I'm going to read 4 pieces. My poem in the anthology, someone else's poem from the anthology, and 2 pieces. I'm going to start with the poem that's not by me, but by someone who was very important to me, the late, great Francisco X. Alarcón. He published, Rigoberto Gonzalez selected a sonnet of his from a sequence of poems that was published back in the 90s from a small press in Santa Cruz called Moving Parts Press. The book was called Of Dark Love, and the sonnets in this collection were inspired by Federico Garcia Lorca's Sonetos del Amor Oscuro. And this is my English translation of Francisco's sonnet. I like to walk beside you, stepping on your shadow along the way, letting your steps mark my steps, follow you like a boat being towed, fitting my feet in the footprints you leave, like a puma on the sand. I want to be the towel that dries you, the one you spread to sunbathe. How lucky, the belt that gets to hug your waist, the crucifix that hangs from a chain on your chest. What joy to arrive every day as a comb and smell the morning in your hair, but rather than comb, uncomb you. 12 or 15 years later, after I came back from Spain, I spent 2 years on the UC Davis campus and had the privilege of taking a creative writing workshop in Spanish with Francisco X. Alarcón. And my poem from the anthology is inspired by a guest poet he invited to our class from Central America. And in my poem, as you'll see, I'm focusing not so much on the poems he read that day, although I do allude to them, but on his accent. One of the gifts of living in Spain for 10 years is that I began to appreciate regional accents. And so when I came back, it was enjoyable just to be able to say, oh, this person's from Argentina, this person's from Cuba, this person's from Mexico, as soon as they opened their mouth. And so in this poem, which I title Nicaragua in a Voice, I'm sort of reflecting on that accent. And also there's an allusion to my father at the end. Although I don't explicitly talk about it, there's a hint of some issues with mental illness. Nicaragua in a Voice. More than the poems, the fruits that sang their juices, dolls, feverish, dreaming of nights, city streets. For me, it was the idle chat between the poems, cordial, intimate almost, like a river's murmur, as if a place, León, Granada, could speak, whistle, inhabit a timbre, as if closing my eyes, I had it again, once more within reach. His voice, my father, unwell, won't speak. This book that was alluded to after Rubén, which was my pandemic book, so I'm very appreciative of being able to read in person from this book because I didn't get to read from it in person in 2020 or 2021, includes 10 versions of Rubén Darío. What I want to share with you now is not one of those 10 versions, but a new version of Rubén Darío, which is forthcoming in a literary journal called Huizache, which is about to migrate from UC Davis to UTEP. And it's, the original title of the poem is Marina. I title my version Aqua. And at first glance, it appears to be, at least to me, just an homage to the ocean. But I think by the end, to me, it also seems to be a poem that hints at perhaps some of the more sinister byproducts of crossing the sea and colonizing. Aqua. Musical ocean. Marvelous ocean. The subtle scent of salt. Spectrum and layers of sound. Texture of my swaddling days, in which the hours blur into movement, series of soothing steps, leaving me in a trance, bathed. Musical ocean, marvelous ocean of diamonds rising, fragile lace coming apart, mirroring the cities in the sky, blue and white, from which bloom perpetual songs. Father ocean, mother ocean, spirit unseen, overtaking me. Billowing propulsion, sea expedition of explorers, harassed by fierce cyclical winds, menace of the most jagged of crags, those golden oar-driven boats, wooden vessels, their purple sails coming upon it, a blue, bellowing bull, and she astride it, riding over the roiling expanse, that sound arresting, the froth, a throng of throngs, Where does it begin? Where does it end? This deity of the sea as arms surface, emerging like swords, slicing through the foam. And then you see it soaking through, rising, falling, a heaving bed of roses. And I will close with a poem whose form of repetition is inspired by the Cuban-American poet Emma Trellis. And it's a poem dedicated to my husband, though at the time it was written, he was my fiancé. Some reasons for Dave. Because Iowa raised him. Because the snare drum was his globe. Because he's retired Air Force. Because inter-island is what he flies. Because lockdown was a wake-up call. Because we mostly Zoomed our first year. Because one August day in Maui he sat me down. Because he joined me and remained seated. Because it was a bench of stone. Our backs were to the sea. Because that September we went for a stroll. Because the lovely view of the dome. Because we paused and sat on another bench. Because, like him, I didn't get down on one knee. The sun sprinkled its shards across St. Joseph's Lake. Because that afternoon I spread him like an eagle. Because he sinks into his pool of no return. Because I pause for the way he feels while under me. Because restraints are another form of freedom. A certain touch is what he craves. Because I embrace it. Because I relinquish it. Because sometimes I move against him slowly. I reach around and hold him in my hand. Because I marvel at how he grows. Because he'll be 63 in November. Because my mouth glides across his chest. Because I'll be 57 in December. Our cheeks touch as we drift off to sleep. Because we shower together. Because Sunday night baseball is a favorite date. Because hiking the North Shore is another. Because as a teen he was tenderly shy. Because he still is. Because I picture the moment he becomes a pilot. He is 9 when mom pulls the yoke, lifting them both into the sky. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. So I have to thank Francisco and Letras Latinas for having this idea to do this, and Francisco for being my poetry guardian angel. I would have no poetry life without him. And to thank Woodland Pattern, and Ann and Carl, the founders of Woodland Pattern, are here. Always grateful to you. And Jenny and Laura, our current directors, who I can't love any more than I already do, right? So thank you all. And also all the folks that we're presenting with today. So happy to be with you all. So I'm going to do the same thing Francisco did, and I'm going to read someone else's poem from the anthology, and then mine in the anthology, and then 2 very short, newer poems of mine, or one is very short, and one is pretty short. So I chose, there were so many poems in here that I really liked, that it was difficult to choose. I almost chose the one Mauricio chose, so you'll get to hear that one. And I love Juan Felipe's poem, Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings, and almost read that. Maybe we can read that at the end. But I felt like Diana Garcia's poem speaks so completely to this moment. And she wrote it about what was happening in 1953, and yet it is now, right? So this poem of hers is titled Operation Wetback, 1953. The day begins like any other day. Your daughter soaks a second diaper, chortles as she shoves her soft cooked egg to the floor. Knees pressed to cracked linoleum, you barely notice as your husband strokes your belly. Mija, or mijo, he croons, prophetic plea, then squeezes your nalgas as if to gauge for ripeness. As he edges past, you notice how his blue shirt blurs against the summer sky, how sky absorbs his patch of blue, then empties. Moments later, a truck groans, moves on, carting rumblings of men headed for the fields. Years later, you tell your son and daughter of that anguished day, how green card migrants vanished from the camps. You tell your children how news gripped the camps of trains headed south, loaded with wetbacks. You never tell your children what you can't forget, how you failed to squeeze back, failed to wave goodbye, failed to taunt him with viejo sin vergüenza. You never tell your children how you forgot this one man's voice, a voice that brushed your ears, your hair, a path down your back, a voice that blends with sounds of a truck that never brought him home. Ooh, that one was hard to read. And this is my poem in the anthology. And, you know, I do a lot of ekphrastic writing. I write other poems too. I mean, it's not, but I really, I'm a big lover of visual art. And so I do a lot of poems that are inspired by it. And this happens to be one that was inspired by an installation that was created by the performance artist and installation artist Guillermo Gomez Peña and another artist, Roberto Cifuentes. And I saw it at the Institute for Contemporary Art in Detroit. I think that's what it's called. Is it called the Institute for Contemporary? They're a big art museum. Detroit's big art museum is where I saw this piece. And it just so happened that at the time I was a graduate student and I was taking a course, a poetry writing course in formalism. And we were required to write in a different form, given form, you know, every day, received form every day or every time. And the assignment was to write in Old English alliterative verse. And I said to myself, how the hell am I going to do that? How am I going to make that fit my context, right? Or my context fit into that? And then I went and I saw the installation, and magic happened. So this is called Report from the Temple of Confessions in Old Chicano English. Oh, I have to say, I'm sorry that the installation, all the imagery you're going to hear in here, it was in this installation, okay? Se cruzan canyons in el templo de confessions. Language lies across the barbed lines, piles of its limbs pierced y pinchados. Risky recordings reveal what we think of the other offering his objectified body to the river rats who ride his wet back, the coro de coyotes who crave his flesh, the way-faced who whisper their sin in his ear, the translators who trap and trade his tongue, la raza who receive him, la raza who repel him. In this chamber, the chill of chicken flesh, pollito mojado, picoso y picado, the black body bag of the repatriated. Here, the distorted words of debutantes y do-gooders, of no-no-betters y neo-Nazis, of Beowulfs and other born-again beasts, of sandaled sombreros sleeping under cacti, of Machiavellian mentes y mouths, of anthropological autoethnography, of pretend pachucas peeling their layers, of preachers and poets with puckered lips, of the Hispanic hodgepodge hiding their indio, of the Quetzalcoatl's concealing their conqueror, de la migra meando marking its turf. Here, the hemispheres blend, a vacuum of voices absorbed by the velvet paintings of slick y sexy santos, of the Aztec icon at the altar of Aztlan, tripping and turning transvestite warrior, of the cyber cholo stripping down, Simon, the vato locos liquid eye lures us over borders, their blurred tumbling barriers calling us to come, stare into the cage, jaula de joda aquí juntándonos, the table turned and tacked to the wall, lit with votives licking our luscious breakfast bowl of cucarachas on their backs, squirming to free their feet and fly. So there really was a bowl of live cucarachas who were turned on their backs because they can't turn over. And I was in the museum with my friend David, who just kept wanting to turn them over. I kept saying, don't turn them over, David. Okay. And these two are new poems. This one, first one, is one that is talking about my great-grandmother when she had to rescue my grandfather from being hung. And it's called Lineage para la bisabuela, which means for the great-grandmother I never knew. Our lineage, 8 burros fencing a single aguacate tree in the middle of an open field. This is where you kneel, hide behind the blinking eyes, soft bellies of a breathing shield, tails smacking at buzz-stung air. Torches burn barns to the ground behind you, daughters grasping both your hands, youngest slung across your breast like La Adelita's bandolera, all because you packed a lunch, tied a sprig of mint in your son's hat. They said he was feeding the wrong side, so they bound his hands and marched him blindfolded 3 days to the next village, where a noose wreathed his neck, feet planted like stones on a crate. What if you hadn't burst in, breathless and begging, just before they kicked it out from under him, from under the church that received his sun-beaten body, soaked rags and raindrops of water on clay lips? From under the train that hauled him north with the woman who housed seeds that would sprout ears perked for each other's screaming when she pushed all of us into this singed world with no ring of stubborn creatures to shield us. And then lastly, this is called deportation. We were all once citizens of snow, born beneath the stretched skins, taut tarps of our sisters and brothers. Stateless citizens of desert doorways so low, our kin had to bow to greet us as we entered the ark of this world. We each held a bowl of slate blue sky, and wherever we carried it, welcomed us home. See, there are no nations, no papers, no passports. There are no quotients in this genius heritage, only jungles of bougainvillea that reach like bodies to the morning sun, iguana tails smacking still air. Only ladders to other levels of love. Gracias. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Let's channel Juan Felipe. Say, what is today?
What is today?
Today is.
Today is.
Un super.
Un super.
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 Pero muy super.
Pero muy super.
Poetry sexy.
Poetry sexy.
Sunday. Clearing customs. Returning took 30 years. I fly into Bogota at night. Landing in the Andes is like a moth dipping into the side of a starry bowl. Of all my luggage, the uniformed woman at customs is most suspicious of my electric typewriter. I open it up for her. What's it for? I write poems. What kind of poems? Poems that shine a light, a little flashlight, into the guts of my typewriter. Poems of small children who sleep under bridges. Poems through which rivers move. Translations hawk perched on the shoulder of a statue. Poems like lime juice falling into soup and the smell of fresh bread down every alleyway. She almost smiles. I can see only the top of her gold tooth in the fluorescent light, motioning me forward. Siga, siga, she says, and I pass. Okay. Everybody was interested in Dan Bada's poem, so let's do it. Small Shame Blues. I live with the small shame of not knowing the multiple names for blue to describe the night sky over New Mexico, to describe the light in my lover's eyes. It is a small shame that grows. I live with the small shame which resides in the absence of my speech as I pause to search for the word in Spanish, to translate a poem to my father, who sits there waiting, who scans my eyes to see what I cannot fully describe, who waits for the word from me, the word that escapes me in the moment, the word I fear has never resided within me. It is a small shame that grows when indigo and cerulean are merely azul and not añil and cerúleo. The door between. She compared America to Rome, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Hunter, my backyard neighbor, refuses to say my birth name. I live in a house in the city where officials have canceled live music and other public displays of affection. For days, I haven't seen my companion, who was called to the basement, then below the basement, to where the catacombs circle back. There, the echoes of babies roam for their mothers. Between then and now, I lost the ability to hear gestures. Today, I'm making bread in a Dutch oven. Old English, breotan, to break into pieces. At some point, the dog busts out from under the table, flying for the front door. He's all hackles and teeth. But I'm in the middle of taking the bread out of the oven to cool. It crackles on the stone. What you need to know is that our door is made of metal with an inset of thick cut glass, a mandorla I can see through, magnification and triptych transparencies. I can't hear him cling to the screen with tiny salmon feet and pecking beak. It's the city and everything is loud. The center of the glass is shaped as a teardrop. American goldfinch, tristis, sorrowful, black mask and lemon bright plumage. He is magnified, singing unheard in the fragmented peripheries. I wish my companion were here to translate the tilt of the tail feathers, the nervous preening at the wing. Tomorrow will repeat itself. Hunter at daybreak, crushing stones with the forehead of other stones. Okay, and Jan, can you do a little walkabout and show the people? This is a German refugee painter who, maybe you know St. Pauli the beer. There's also a team in Hamburg called St. Pauli, and they are their brand is they're unabashedly anti-fascist. And they use the stadium as a community art space on off weekends. Lives of the cat, selfie in a pool. I eagled my baby, Vol, naughty me, amuse bouche. I dipped from the wet. I mirrored the Waffe of my Kunst. I embered my tongue at astronomical sunset. I pired my windows until they dripped yaku. I condored the dark. I mountained Los Andes and turkey vultured the hollowed foothills of Yins and Yorn. I auctioned my song off to the lowest bittern. I canapéed the chlorinated cheeks of David Hockney, shaved with ginger. I bluesed when I should have azured. I mingused without Thelonious and therefore abjured any traces of the Buddha. I isotoped every element and nose-ringed the planets. I inked inside the melensana glow of each ear. One a fish skeleton, blood vessels tearing up. The other, fuck fascist dogs.
Again, it's hard to follow all these great readers. I feel very fortunate to be included in this anthology, and especially to be celebrating it here at Woodland Pattern, where I've learned so much. I'm grateful to Rigoberto and everybody involved in the anthology, and Carl and Ann. I don't think I would have had a chance to make myself into a poet if I hadn't ended up a half a block from here when I first moved here. So I'm going to start with a poem from one of my favorite, probably my favorite Latino poet, Frank Lima. It's called Oklahoma, America. And I don't know if you knew this, but Oklahoma is a concatenation of two Choctaw words. It means red people. The fathers of America have ruined the mountains. The mothers of America have dried the riverbeds. The children of America are dying at play. Our forefathers watch our neonates mouse the words of freedom, words vagrant fallopian worms. Our birds' freedom, our children's sheep. This is the year of the bullet, of white professional homework, of Nagasaki fertilizer, of cheap fuel oil, of tender SS movies, this oncotic Americana. This is why fish will fly to heaven. We are the widow of our dreams. We are shrinking in their skin. We are attached to their wisdom. Look at the thermos-colored sky, fame flying on TV. They wash their hands in our womb, where the dead know the stars, our sleeping children. Like the procession of the equinox, condensing our fate. We are furies of entropy. We have killed 160 million human trees this century. Who will wear their clothes? Death is as round as an apple, holding a child ever so gently. They no longer see the kangaroo. They cannot touch the innocent mirror with their wet hands. The tears are drowning in their sand pails like lyrical lips. The mothers will never be the sun on their faces. Oh, my beloved country, where is the antelope of love? Why does the earth turn away from the sun? Why are the children covered with concrete, rain, and neglected specks of freedom? This is my poem from the anthology. I was surprised that they picked this one. It's not typical, but I think it's a good poem. I like it, but it's called The Grotesque Side of Panama with Cooling Shadow. And I just want to say that all my books are about Panama in some way. I want to say also that there's a typo in the second line in the anthology. It should be H-I-R, not H-E-R. I am from a stitch-sewn angel's death, her innocent mouth ripped apart by knives and a sandblast, a blood-soaked mass to the meat of the door. My cover is a brutal silence of the jungle lord of disappearances, as I do not stand well against the patterns of a pure night's grief without trigger. One day the visions of pain outside the body lose the sun's directions. The executions of my intimate outline to extinguish the real stand for you to be seen as a knotted time collects our dripping sweat from the clouds, and our water serves for the death of evocable daylight. Midnight slices my body in two, as I am so happy to see the human alternative, and my face drops off with a crash to the other side of each of the earth's symbols. Where can I hunt the threat to unite with you? Bullshit allowance for the blank persons of the world. Encounter the amputations of visibility and the loss of a wandering origin. To be gone, the canal is gone as the Mississippi purls to my neck. And this last poem is a 2-page prose poem. It's called The Orchid. And in another poem, I say that the common person is an orchid. And in Panama, there are many different kinds of orchids. And there's one in particular called El Espíritu Santo, which is a national flower of Panama. And if you look inside, there's a little angel. I am a blood cell in the oceans of a slaughtered side of origin. My distance shrinks with time and limbs that cross like vines in jungles filled with sleek and wooden jaguars. My start is gone, as I do not belong to anyone or any place. My start is now the blood in motion for the animals far beyond horizons. The computer tries to force me in its quest for comfort through its pretensions of location. It tries to trap me with its absence of connection for its empty sets of origin foreseen. But connection is not made without the light. I exist through lightning past the forest, through the screen. I exist in lamentation for the light within that I for many days ignore. And so, terror sings within me now. Terror makes me fill the earth with smoke as I move past the others to arrive within the shade. I see beyond the screen without my mind. I see the weather drenched with numbers. But the orchid of my morning is still here. The orchid has a spirit like an angel. Unqualified observers now insist that I am wrong to make an outline of my songs, delete foundations. My songs erase a stolen refuge in my stories. Their camouflaged intentions cancel breathing in the world. Their imagined refuge is a casket made of mountains, full of torturous inhabitations. But the outlines of my songs now protect me and move through me. Like moving strings, they find the other forms of mourning. My past of canceled links escapes the monitors. I am not related to the rules of service. Observers cannot follow me in life as I was born without the earth inside. They judge my salt to make themselves more real as computation. But judging without animals and bridges leaves them without answers. It leaves them with the burden of our artificial light. Color does not force me. Color is my signal to evolve. Observers are not real without relation, but now an unknown terror flows within me through the screen. My terror has no season, as the sun has been examined for too long. I am not wrong to be alone. I am not wrong to turn away manipulations of proximity. The clothes from far away cannot become me or cancel my oblivion. Location is not home. My memories bring horses through the night. There is no fence for them. They bring me home. They know that I have seen the night in stillness to the stars above the torn up skies. The night is my best solitude. The morning. The horse does not display, as I do nothing to belong to surface computations. I cannot explain my sweat or how my body forms again beyond catastrophes. My freedom is not ruled by lineage, but still my gratitude brings terror in the night. So far, the terror does not see me. It knows that I am gone for other animals as we explore the bottom of the oceans. It knows that I am not related to my neighbor, and that my neighbor cannot find me without signs. My sign becomes a night as morning comforts me to darkness woven into light, as a neighbor must evolve to be the quartered sun for others. I must also be the morning through a future sequence of disasters. The Panama Canal was a big and empty, arrogant deception. Previously symbolic of American apartheid, it remains a mark of shame inside belonging to the ground. Even so, through it I join the oceans, through the sea and me, that now becomes a target for escape. The canal belongs to Panamanians now. They will not belong to others anymore. The mountains there now fold away in secret, and the four in unknown origin escapes me once again for counting through the distances of memory implantations. The pause that tried to feed me in my youth now builds a wave of salt and terror in my tombs of dispossession for the future. My silence builds for this. The terror that becomes inside me builds a path for other ones to be. No neighbor here is known through gold or silver. No neighbor here is unrelated to exceptional attention. Nothing is forgotten through the animals. I escape the toggles of connection. The earth evolves inside me now as I am born again through blood and terror in the faces without form. As everything is ending like a broken screen, I am new to the beginning of the light inside the animals. Forced relation is not possible, as Panama has gone outside the world. My answers do not locate. 7 is not offered either for the hidden trails. It is only me who says my formless words. But I am not the only one to stand beside the ancient stones to start again. The end that now arrives belongs to me as 7, as I do not count numbers. My terror has not softened like an angel in an orchid thrown into the fire. My terror now becomes the trees at night. My night evolves to death that rattles like a snake on endless paths up and down the mountains. There my dreams grow often without water. There I now awaken with a jolt that burns my head with lost computers. The fire becomes me as I grow with animals and seeing broken spirits. I grow to find the mountains far away, in anguish born to be the orchid. There, the threats now comfort me as fire within reflection of each petal. My wooden jaguar is now sleek and found attention. My sister animals now cry for us again. I now see past the doors that long ago were broken. I see my other baby sister there, young and crying, naked too. I move through broken space to see the giant yellow wig waving in the current on a broken female oracle. The picnic table that they cover in the kitchen is now dark again with snow outside belonging. My love is in the past this moment and in the future after dark. And so I stumble to return in our new orchid to be home, this timelessness. I make my absent cause be found in earthly song. Thank you.
Wow. Right? This reading has been so incredibly moving. If you are like me, then you have felt the goosebumps and the chills in your body, and you're like, I think I'm living 5 lives here. I don't know what's going on. Like, there's a lot happening. I'm deeply grateful. I am deeply grateful to the poets assembled, to Michael, who will be in conversation with us, to Woodland Pattern for welcoming us, to Roberto for gathering these poems together in this incredible anthology. If you don't have like 5 copies that you have given away, I don't know what you're doing with your life. You can get some today and get your life right. Like, so I was thinking as Roberto was reading. A few weeks ago, I was in Philly, which is where I'm from, and I was invited to be one of the folks for Career Day at a school called Farrow Elementary. 2 of my cousins happen to work there, which is wonderful. So I go, and I'm doing these class visits with the 4th graders. And they're like, so what do you do? You're a poet. Okay. And I'm like, yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but I'm just going to talk to you about being a poet. And one of the students there asked such brilliant questions, and one of the questions was, what do your children teach you? Because I can't help talking about my baby. Mike and I had this conversation last night. I have 3 children. And since my oldest was 8 weeks old. I was like, when do you stop talking about your children at a reading? And then the people at the reading were like, you kind of never do. So I was talking about the kids, and one of the kids at the school asked me, so like, what do your children teach you? And I had so much to say about that. And the same child asked me this question, which was like, what does the poet do? And I was like, well, the poet, a lot of people in their work, they see reality as it is. They knock on the desk and they feel the desk, and that's what it is. I'm resting on the desk, I do my work at the desk, and then I move on to another desk or another classroom. Whereas a poet knocks on here, but also feels all the possibilities of time and space beyond this fixed thing, and starts to hear, like I imagine this as lecture, starts to hear the preacher giving the sermon at someone's wedding, but also at their funeral, right? And collapses time, starts to feel the possibilities of this wood being many trees and how they talk together in the past. Like the poet is able to bend space and time and see the multiplicities and feel them within their body, and through language, help others to connect in that way, right? To feel again. And in this time, when part of the strategies in our world, in our country right now, is to produce so much havoc that you stop feeling, the work of the poet is incredibly important. We got to keep feeling and connecting and struggle. The poet, like Yesenia Montilla, who sees a globe and a map, and it's not just that. So I'm going to read her poem called Maps. And if you have the book, it's on page 507, follow along. Maps from Marcelo. Some maps have blue borders, like the blue of your name, or the tributary lacing of veins running through your father's hands, and how the last time I saw you, you held me for so long, I saw whole lifetimes flooding by me, small tentacles reaching for both our faces. I wish maps would be without borders, and that we belong to no one and to everyone at once. What a world that would be, or not a world. Maybe we would call it something more intrinsic, like forgiving, or something simplistic, like river, or dirt. And if I were to see you tomorrow and everyone you came from had disappeared, I would weep with you and drown out any black lines that this earth allowed us to give it, because what is a map but a useless prison? We are all so lost, and no naming of blank spaces can save us. And what is a map but the delusion of safety? The line drawn is always in the sand and folds on itself before we're done making it. And that line there, south of El Rio, how it dares to cover up the bodies as though we would forget who died there and for what. As if we could forget that if you spin a globe and stop it with your finger, you'll land it on top of someone living. Someone who was not expecting to be crushed by thirst. The poet sees the layers of the world, right? So the poem that's in the anthology for me is Southwest Philadelphia, 1988, when I would have been about 7 years old. And I think it's cool. It has voices within it, so it's a little bit of marginalia, so you'll hear those voices through. And in the newer poem that I'll read, also my daughter's voice comes in, but my father is in this one. And my people are always with me, so I was surprised that they chose this poem, but also like, yeah, of course, my people are always with me. And where am I from? I'm from Southwest Philly, and I love that my love for my city is so very evident here, and also the tensions within it, and the love for family is evident too. So Southwest Philly, 1988. Our eyes focused on swirled vats, vanilla ice cream, then cherry water ice, more vanilla. Cherry for a tower of red and white stripes that melted into pink after heat stroll. We had to wait for tall plastic cups, like all the brown kids. while Papi grumbled, "Miss, why we always gotta wait? We were here first, my children were here first. Counter girls sucked their teeth, gloved their hands, but only for us. Blackness was catching the neighborhood, pecking ravens in flight, us and them, but we never noticed that then. Children with stained history, my brother fair-skinned and universal prize, and me, black and not. Walked the block with the evidence there. Cherry, crystal-flecked jackets, happy. Papi held our hands, brooding the cost." So, in Philly, if you go to like Rita's Water Ice, and I go with my kids every spring because they give you a free one every spring, that is called a gelati, which is like so interesting now that I'm married to an Italian, and he's like horrified. Like, gelati, what is this? What is this? And this newer poem, so I have to tell you a few things. So last year, my daughter and I are going through a potty training experience. And to help her to sit in the place long enough, I do what you should never do, which is I give her a screen. Yeah, those who have done this know that that's an error, that you should never do that. And so eventually she gets to the point where she won't go to the bathroom unless she has a screen, hence the root of this protest that you'll hear here. Also, if you are not, deeply immersed in child world right now, Peppa Pig is a big deal, an animated cartoon. So she makes an appearance here. But you can also hear a little bit of me and my daughter talking. So it goes from a lot of lightness into a lot of tension and looking at the world. So I want to prepare you for that shift too.
Oh no, not the color blue. Should we talk about the color red?
No.
Should we talk about the color black?
No.
Should we talk about the color white?
No.
Should we talk about the color rainbow?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a story about the rainbow that only comes when the rain goes. This is a story about the rainbow that only comes when the rain goes.
Protest on January 29th, 2024. No Peppa, no potty, she says while she hardens her eyes, drops her mouth's softness to stone grimace. She will not go, though she must. No Peppa, no potty. When I remind her that she can watch as I do her hair, our morning ritual, love and tender brush the tangles releasing to the oils in my hands, I offer her this lesson. I will support and celebrate her ability to choose, always, even her own body's work. I will always affirm her right, but protest for a free life. Should I tell her about the girl in the bombed out car? Her family dead around her, how she called for help. The pleading of many tongues, help, fleshy to its tooth-breaking pit. All she received was her body's retrieval when the bullet stopped gutting metal. How to cut the wisps of my daughter with this, a name, Hen Press, which means not only gentle dear, but tender, a name which means respect to all, to fear, gentle to all, the feared, dear, how to feed my daughter on fat and learn new words, atrocity and devastation and genocide and protest. I tell her about the children without running water, without light or food, or cupcakes because she is 3. What should I tell her about how killers use the cries of children to call the people out to explode the bombs in their tanks? The gathering of limbs to bury wrapped in white, how one body becomes the communal body. Not this. There was a picture of a little girl in a graduation gown. Behind her delicate tulips, the color of hair bows set in the silk of her hair, pastels the color hair bows should be. Maybe she wanted to be a doctor, like my daughter, like the 2 ambulance workers who died trying to save her. She was 5. 335 bullets were fired into the car. My daughter has just learned to count to 12. She is 3. No pepper, no potty. A first protest. I tell her we must stand for something. We can sit too for something. Protest for a life. A protest is a way to help. Even a child can help. We must protest for the good of people. Protest to live out a gentle all without fear. My daughter wants to be a healer someday. Today, she learns her body can be a protest, and it must. Thank y'all.
Incredible readings. Thank you. Incredible. I'm going to change things over really quick. We'll get the panel going. I did want to say one thing, which is that there will be time for audience questions. If you're here in the room, I'll walk a mic around. If you're out there on Crowdcast, you can put questions in the chat, and we will try to get to as many as we can. All right, one moment.
You know, when I was saying thank yous before, I forgot to thank Mike, and Mike did so much work to make this happen. So thank you, Mike. You did a lot.
I think you have one.
I do have one. I also have a computer that I was expecting to have a table. No, that's good. I like having a computer on my lap. Okay. It's called a laptop, right?
Like I should be far away from the mic. It's not that really.
Where to begin? It's really an incredible series of readings, and thank you for inviting me to moderate this. It's a tall task, but an easy one as well, because you all are such generous readers. Brenda suggested that we might organize this this part of this session around 3 things in particular. One is questions about the poems that you all read, and then questions about the anthology more broadly, and then finally questions about the state of Latinx poetry and Latinx literature more broadly. But I'm going to go off script a little bit because I was touched by all the poems, but I was particularly moved by Raina, your reading of your new poem, Protest, but because of there's obviously the protest from your daughter and the protest about the injustices in the world. They're so resonant. So what I wanted to begin with is in the introduction, Rigoberto claims that urgency is the shared animating quality binding the diverse tradition of Latino poetry. Right, and there's a sort of urgency in that poem, both the urgency to go to the bathroom, right, and the urgency to stand up or sit down against injustices. So I wanted to ask all of you, maybe we can begin with Raina, how do you understand, inhabit, and incorporate urgency in your poems? Right? And I would be particularly interested in hearing about how you articulate or communicate that urgency on the page, and how that urgency becomes perhaps more urgent or more animated in performance, right, in the reading. And after we think about urgency, I want to maybe take the opposite tact, which is to think about what we might miss in our poems when we foreground urgency against maybe other sorts of metrics for understanding the value of what you all do.
So many options. I think so. I was holding the story of this little girl in that car, and desperately hoping that she would be saved, right? And watching the news from day to day, and discovering, right? But then thinking within that poem of, this is a little girl who, you know, in this graduation gown, and there are tulips, and like seeing pictures of her life before, and thinking about my own daughter, and thinking about so many children who are impacted by war, by genocide, by crises. And yes, we're very different and distant, and yet feeling how interconnected we are. And that was the driving urgency within that poem too, of like, what can we do when we're so far away? And what can I do with my daughter? And what do I tell her about the news? Because she can't read yet. Like, what do I tell her about our connection with that in a way that she can grow and feel like she has some power to do something, even as a 3-year-old, right? And I think that Stacey Ann Chin has this incredible series called Living Room Protests on YouTube when her daughter was just a baby. Fantastic series, totally recommend people looking at it. But also in the space of like coming from someone who is a poet and activist and was on the front lines in a lot of different movements, and saying, I've got this baby, and I need to guard her physically, but also thinking about how one can continue in action. And I think that that's a lesson for all of us when it's like, oh, I am immunocompromised, I can't go to the protest. Well, what can we do? How can we uplift a challenge and think about how we can connect with one another? So that coming into the poem, but also into our lives, right? Because the poem is life.
Anyone else want to talk about urgency? Yeah.
I'm not sure urgency is the right word, but what I was thinking about as you were posing the question, just last Friday, I was visiting my high school in San Francisco, a Catholic high school, and I was very appreciative of the instructor who was introducing me, and Dave was there with me. And he unapologetically, just matter of fact, said, here's Francisco, and this is Dave, his husband. So for me, in an environment right now where a lot of queer and trans voices are being erased from libraries, or vocabulary is being scrubbed from websites, I feel what I can do is just be myself unapologetically, both in my day-to-day life and in my poems, like the last one I read today. Yeah. And it was just so heartening to be in that space in a Catholic high school in San Francisco, whose archbishop wouldn't be particularly friendly towards me being there. It felt like a form of resistance just to be in that space and to be talking about my poems. And so that's sort of my role, I think, is just being unapologetically joyful and celebrating what my life is right now.
A couple things. I mean, I guess urgency implies necessity and something about time. Yeah. And, we're all under attack right now, so there's that kind of urgency to express ourselves and be heard and to share our work. And, I'm lucky that I feel that, I have an urgency. I've always had an urgency to write. I've been lucky enough to write almost every day of my adult life. And at the same time, that's not something you can rush, really, but the the things around it, I think, having an event like this is a response to that, and so.
I don't know that sometimes when you don't have a good answer, you shouldn't. So right now, I don't have, I appreciated the different responses to the urgency question. I guess I have always felt the urgency of, my first book was Postmortem, the urgency of existence, of mortality, the work and joy that has to be done, whether you're a poet or not. And I think I'm just going to stop there, and I'm going to pivot in a completely different direction and recommend this wonderful book called Tell Me About Your Bad Guys, Fathering in Anxious Times by Michael Dowdy. It is a brilliant book. He's so cute. It's a brilliant book about a very serious subject. It's absolutely incumbent upon all genders to recognize the importance of the role that we all play in constructing the culture that we live in. And if we want to shake ourselves from the shackles of an oppressive patriarchy, we have to allow fathers and mothers, but in particular in this book, fathers, a father and a daughter, to have serious conversations. And I highly recommend it. It is lyrical and critical nonfiction, very dense and extremely accessible at the same time. So that's enough, because I hate capitalism. So somebody else talk.
Urgency. I think I didn't even really realize it until today that all the poems I read had something to do with migration, and in the current state, just like Francisco was talking about, the attacks upon people who are not heterosexual white males, right? But also on people who are migrating, and yet in a time when we have so much migration for so many reasons, right? There's climate migration, right? We have climate refugees. We have, and for me, I guess there's an urgency in needing to communicate to people out there what, this sort of question of why do you think people are doing this migration, right? They don't want to leave their homes. They don't want, it's not like, oh yeah, I want to go through this horrible, trek through the desert and pay these coyotes all this money and, yay, wouldn't that be fun, right? No, right? And their urgency, right, is so grave, right? It's like life or death most of the time, right? And then the notion of just deporting people in mass, is something that I'm thinking about all the time. So it's coming out in poems, and even the poem about my great-grandmother, way back then, they were escaping the revolution, right, in Mexico. So, yeah.
As you were speaking about, no one leaving home unless, but the quotation from Worcestershire, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark, right?
Right.
So that kind of danger of the impetus for moving. And I hadn't seen that, I think, with most of our poems, of like, there is this home, but also the edge of it, the terror of it, the grief of it, the cost, right?
Thank you all. It's all quite lovely. This is another, I think, a big picture question about the poems. Francisco Robles, the scholar, in his new book, Coalition Literature, argues that the anthology, a very famous canonical anthology in Latinx letters, this bridge called My Back, is constituted by a series of situations of tension and surprise. The very situation of the anthology as a curated object, he writes, suggests that surprise is perhaps the most salient experiential category through which to move through the text. The goal is not infinite newness, it is instead to generate imaginative connections through as many ontological and epistemic avenues as possible. So I would love to hear from you all about the place of surprise in your poetics or in your poems, or the place of surprise in an anthology like this one. And again, you can take this in whatever direction you want. So surprise.
You know, something that comes to mind right away for me is in listening to one of Mauricio's new poems that he read at the end, the surprises in the language, right? The way in which he was verbing, I think he was verbing a bunch of nouns, right? And so I think that that's one thing that is true probably for most poets, all poets, is that we want there to be some surprise either in the way that we're forming a phrase, what words we're putting together, how we're saying something in a way it hasn't never been said before, or some surprise in the way there's a turn in the poem, right? And so, you know, Mauricio's poem was just full of surprises in that sense. You know, I don't know about my own. I guess I think of the little deportation poem and opening it with, "We were all once citizens of snow," right? You know? So yeah, like you wouldn't, like you don't expect it. I mean, it's just not once upon a time, you know, so yeah.
I took away a little bit of the surprise with the last poem that I read, right? The protest poem. And I was like, so I'm just gonna let you know it's sweet, 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 but then it's not so sweet, y'all. And I did that on purpose, clearly. But I was thoughtful around that shift is pretty big. It's a pretty huge emotional shift in that poem. And I don't carry therapist cards, and I'm not a therapist. It's like, I just wanted everyone to be a little bit more prepared to like, this is a big one, and it's connected to my lived experience with my daughter and also the state of the world, and you might have some big feelings about it, right? And like Francisco, your poems, the poems you read were like sexy as F, right? Like they were amazing poems. Like they were so sexy. So I have heard you read many times. And I have loved your readings every single time. And I was not prepared. And I was like, yes! So that was my surprise in this reading. And I was so joyful about it.
Oh, and the way you inhabited that.
I know.
That Francisco Alarcón poem. Yes. And perhaps because you were the translator. You know, to translate work, you have to be so inside of it, you know, that.
Oh, the shadows. Oh, yeah.
I think part of what's useful here is that some surprises are good and some surprises are bad.
Yeah.
Right? And there is a tension between wanting to preserve the animating tension and joy potentially of surprise and offering a proper content warning.
Yes, right.
Right? Because one person's surprise could be someone else's trauma, right? So yeah, I think that's a really useful kind of rubric for thinking through that dynamic. Would you all? Yeah.
I've been finding myself surprised. You know, these new Darío versions I've been working on, I started working on them last summer. I was doing a residency at Ragdale. And I didn't have any rhyme or reason of what I was going to choose to work on. And I chose that poem of Rubén Darío's, Marina, which I'd known for years but hadn't really closely read. And it wasn't until I began actually translating it that, at least through my lens, that second half of that poem with that last image of the roses, it was a huge surprise to me. It starts off as just like this homage to the ocean, and it does that shift where it's almost like a subtle critique to the whole, encounter, 1492 encounter in some ways. And that was a surprise to me because I don't consider, we don't normally consider Rubén Darío a political poet, but there he was, very subtly, I think anyway, as I'm reading it from this perspective, critiquing that experiment.
I had a great teacher at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Bill Harold, and he would talk regularly about the importance of deploying surprise. And I took that to heart, and you can see it in my poems. And what I think what's behind it is an attempt through the art to bring joy back into language and bring joy back into experience and to dramatize our subjectivities and to resist, to go back to urgency, to resist the somebody else's script about how the world should be. And we do this in a microcosm, but yeah.
I'm not sure what to say about surprise. I guess it means something unexpected. And I guess if I wrote something, it was something that I expected, then I wouldn't keep it.
Roberto, I think that's what we call the mic drop. Well done. I had the good fortune to be in Chicago on Friday for a translation conference at UIC, and I had a chance to commune with three poets in this volume: Ora Joan Noel, Daniel Brzezinski, and Stephen Alvarez. And Ora Joan gave a reading like he always gives, virtuosic, like the room just changed shape. And afterwards I was like, Ora, I've seen you many times over the years, and this is the best yet. And he was like, I think he was, I'm pretty sure it was a chaotic sort of reading. And he was like, well, as Edwin Torres, who is also in the volume, says, never be basic, right? And I feel like that's what all of you here today, just the sort of energy, which is a type of urgency as well.
These poets you mentioned are in this book too.
All of them are. Yep.
And Edwin Torres, and who else did you mention?
Stephen Alvarez and Daniel Brzezinski. Yeah. This switch gears just a little bit. Just one last thing on surprise. Several of you expressed surprise about your poem selection. Right.
What he chose.
Yeah, and maybe we can leave this for later, but I'm just curious about what it feels like to have your life and the poetry and your poetry to be represented by a single poem. Right. Gwendolyn Brooks very famously. There's recordings of her expressing her disdain for anthologists. It's like, I've written more than one poem. It's not just We Real Cool. Right. But let's talk about place and home. Right. This program is called Places We Call Home. Right. An introduction to the volume by Roberto is called Places We Call Home. But it feels like that many of the poems center displacement as much as place. Right. Being away from home as much as home. So I would love to hear you all talk about the place of place. Or displacement in your poems. And I think Roberto's poems are particularly interesting in that regard, because as you say, right, they're all about Panama in a way, but for some readers that might not be as legible. So do you want to start for us?
Yeah, so I was surprised by the poem that you chose for the anthology, only because, grotesque side of Panama, it's not all of Panama. Everything has a grotesque side, I think, and also you can think of it in a literary sense, or I guess beings that are part animal, part human are grotesque, gargoyles are grotesque. So I was a little bit surprised, but then, when I read the poem over and over again, I felt good about it. And I think it's, I'm really glad it's in there. But in terms of place, all my books are about Panama in some way, and I'm always reaching back to that. I mean, I was actually born in Oregon to Panamanian parents, but after a few months I was back in Panama. And I was raised by my grandmother for a while before my parents came back. And I stayed there until I was 7 years old. So it's a defining part of my life. I still have a lot of family down there. It's always been that I'm from Panama. So, I have tried to find Panama here. And I have tried to do that by working in the Latino community, which I've never been able to get a job in the Latino community. But I have, for the last 15 years, been a part of the Indian community in Milwaukee. And I just fell into that by chance. I got embraced by a community of people at a church. And it was amazing to be welcomed to this community of the Lutheran Church of Great Spirit. And eventually they asked me to do the smudging in the Four Directions prayer, and I did that for 10 years, and I was a part of that community doing sweats and learning what I could. And for me, that was largely very related to Panama, because Panama, there's 7 tribes in Panama. 12% of the population is tribal. Almost everybody else is mestizo like me. There was always indigenous influence in my life. My grandmother used to give me Indian things. And I'm also bipolar, and I've had 12 major psychotic breaks. And one of the things that I do when I'm psychotic is I wander around. I haven't been psychotic for a long time, but they're visionary states that are, I think, partly sacred, but also can be very damaging. But one of the things that happened in one of these phases was I wandered around, and they're always apocalyptic. All my manic phases are the apocalypse. So, and I've survived all these, apocalyptic experiences. But one of the things that happened when I wandered around the manic phase at one point was, there's a jungle in Panama called the Darien Jungle. It's, the Darien Gap is part of the Darien Jungle. Route 1 stops at Darien because it's so dense. And I've always thought my first collection of poems I called Darien way back in the early 90s. And now I'm going back to Tropical Lung. But I found in wandering around, there's a town called Darien, and not far away from here. And I wandered there in a gigantic thunderstorm, and I just ended up there by chance. Wow. And also later I found out that Madison is the only major city in the United States built on an isthmus. So I keep finding these reflections, and then and I keep finding these reflections of Panama, and then being in the Indian community now, working with kids in the Indian community, a lot of them are Latinos, and that's it's related. I think it's related in many ways to how I see Panama. And I feel a strong attachment to the Indian community here, and it gives me a sense of place. The facility at the Indian Community School is amazing. It's profound. It's like it's Indian architecture, and it's vast, and it's got beautiful woods, and there's a pair of sandhill cranes that nest there every year, and there's coyotes, and it's just beautiful. And I grew up with Indian stuff. I grew up with these 2 books of Indians. So it's not like I sought it out. I've always thought about it. I mean, I partly went to Indiana University because I thought there were Indians there. I was still trying to figure out the country, even going to graduate school. Why were these places called Indiana? And it's because there were Indians there. And so it's been a lot of stuff like that. And it's not exactly the same, but it's very related. And the architecture, I mean, I go to this place every day, and it's just a refuge for me. It's a lot different than working for white people. And the dynamics completely different. I'm encouraged to be myself for the first time at a job. I've been micromanaged my whole life. And so, now that it seems like the world's falling apart, I get a little bit of refuge every day being with the kids. I get 5 hugs from 3rd graders first thing in the morning, every morning. And a lot of the kids are great. So, place, I'm trying to find reflections of place here, and I've luckily found them, and I haven't really started out. I've just ended up in it somehow.
I remember real quickly, I remember one time, Roberto and I, because we're married, we're walking down, we were down on like Cesar Chavez Boulevard, which is all Mexican pretty much in Milwaukee. There's a big Puerto Rican community too, but on Cesar Chavez, that's Mexican. And he saw there were shells of some fruit. What was that thing? From Panama on the sidewalk.
In Panama,
And
they
he
call
was
them
like,
mamones. It's a rude word, means nipples to some people. But mamones are quenepas, I think Puerto Ricans call them.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen quenepas or mamones since I was 7 years old. And I'm walking down the street, down Mitchell Street downtown, and there's quenepa runs. I can't believe I recognize them. This is like 40 years after I'd seen them or thought about them. I was like,
and
oh my
he had
God.
to follow them. He had to follow them to find where he could
And
find.
I found where they were.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I can jump in. I think the surprise of
Place and home.
place and home.
Yeah.
Because you would also ask the question of like, we were surprised around the choice of the poems. And so I just did a brief turn of the anthology, and I showed you all like, it's kind of cool. It has this like marginalia thing happening, and I was like, I don't think I noticed anybody else having something similar. And there's some really trippy poets like who are included here, like Ura being one of them, for example, who uses the page. Edwin being one of them who like really uses the page, and so do I. And this is like a little hint. It's like, maybe you want to try Brenda's work, like, there's some marginalia there. But I was surprised by that poem too, because I actually don't talk enough about Philadelphia in my work. My bio has Philly all over it. Like, I'm real proud from Philly. And if people ask me something about who I am, I'm like, I'm from Philly. Like, it's the first thing that I tell people, for better or for worse. So, like, how do I walk in the world is very influenced by being from Philadelphia. And the pride that I have, the swagger that I have, the love that I have for my city, and the community is very deep. But I don't write about it a lot in my work. So having that poem in particular chosen was also very interesting. I also don't write a lot about my father in my work. There may be like 3 or 4 poems across all my books that mention my father in any way. And my father and I are very close. He just hasn't appeared in my work that often. And I love how this poem in particular was chosen because it shows him calling our attention and protesting on our behalf, right? Of like, this isn't okay. My kids always have to wait. And, weird thing that they're putting on gloves on their hands, and that's like a slight at us, at children, and yet it's also hygienic. Like, there's that. But it shows him in that protective role of like, there are challenges even with like, giving my kids the sweet that they want, and at the same time, here is this particular problematic experience that they don't see, but I see, and this indicator of what we grow into, of being able to see in a way that he is already showing us, right? So I was surprised by it, but I was also pretty pleased by it, and yeah, so yeah.
About a year and a half ago, it was at Ada Limon's first reading. I sat next to Rigoberto, and he told me, send me 5 poems, and make sure that somehow place is in there. So I sent him 5, and I was actually a bit surprised, but in the end pleased that he chose Nicaragua in a voice. I'm hypothesizing here, but I imagine that he probably saw that poem in the title. Said, okay, I'll choose this one. and I'll be representing Central American poets and et cetera. Very recently, I was asked to guest edit a Central American folio for Huizache. And I immediately thought, okay, let me do something different. Let me see if I can find, with the help of Leticia Hernandez Linares, who are some Central American poets based in the Bay Area. And so she basically co-edited the folio with me. And so I got work from the people I knew about, but then she put on my radar these young, great young poets at SF State who I had not heard of, one who just published a book called La Movida with Night Boat Books. And so I feel very gratified and connected to that pipeline between Central America and the Bay Area. Sergio Ramirez, in some of his fiction work, talks about that specifically Nicaragua and San Francisco. And so I feel gratified of dwelling in that conversation between Central America and the Bay Area.
At least Rico asked you to give him 5 poems. Most of us, we had no idea we were in the anthology. We had no idea what he decided to put in there. He just contacted our publishers. Yeah. He didn't contact us. He just contacted our book publishers and said, I want to use this poem. Can I have permission? Yeah. So, is that what happened to you?
I can't even remember. But I also trust Rigo.
Yeah, I do too.
He knows our work.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to edit an anthology.
Oh yeah.
It's a very difficult task, and the comparison is that I think that Kevin Young, who edited the Anthology of African American Poetry for the Library of America, he had about 10 years to do it, and I think Rigoberto had a couple years, 2 years during the pandemic, right? So it's a hard task. Yeah.
It's smart what he did, because
for sure.
You gotta wait for people to send. I think what he did.
And it's a tremendous effort and labor. Mike, how are we doing on time? Do we want to open it up to the audience, or do you want me to? Or yeah.
And if they don't have questions.
Yeah, I have many, many more. But I'd rather hear from you all.
We like talking to you.
Yeah. Unless you're just dying of boredom. I hope you're not dying of boredom.
Okay, so I'm back here with the mic now. If you have questions, I'll walk it around to you. That way people tuning in on Crowdcast can hear both the question and the answer. And if you're on Crowdcast, you can put questions in the chat. And again, we'll try to get to as many as we can with the time we have. All right.
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I take issue with the Philadelphia folks. Pittsburgh's number one.
He's from Pittsburgh.
Oh, well, what do you know? That's really interesting. I'm a grandfather. My granddaughter will be 2 in June. But my daughter, when she was born, she was kind of feisty. And one of the things that was a challenge for us is to allow my daughter to be feisty so that she could, chart her own way in life, and not be harassed or challenged by other forces that would lead her in the direction that she didn't want to be in. So, that said, are you writing more about the relationships between your children and life in general? That'd be the first question. And the second question is more broadly that it seems like all of you are referencing geography. And my own adage is that there aren't any fences or walls high enough to keep people out.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to hear your point of view on that, if you could express that.
I think, so for the past dozen years, I've been working and revising on long-form fiction, a novel. And it's essentially about a family trying to find itself. And it's a father and a son. The son is adopted. As my sons are adopted, we're all born in Colombia, different parts. They're from the capital, Bogota, and I'm from Boyacá, which is about 4 or 5 hours away. But what is place and what is displacement? I always struggle with both of those things, the alienating aspects of displacement within the normal ecology of social composition. And one thing, just talking about place and Pennsylvania and Reina, I love it how Pittsburgh is, born in Columbia, grew up in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is in the western part of the state, and the eastern part of the state is Philadelphia over here, and we get to be neighbors. and I'll tell you what, if you ever, I don't know if you aspire toward a more progressive politics, if it weren't for Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, we would really, Pennsylvania is a lot like Wisconsin. It's struggling with itself to find out what its identity is. But what place is for me are the ones I love, my constellation of human beings. That's my place. That place can be in other geographical areas, but my wife, my mother, who is 86 and healthy, aside from some hearing loss, really sharp. Reading Thomas Mann now, last book was about the Whiskey Rebellion. She lives by herself, so that's how she kind of creates community in her mind and imagination in her mind. Like Ahi Lee, sometimes I feel like I'm from, and my mother says this too, I'm not sure if I'm from everywhere and nowhere, a specific place, or is the specific place the heart of love,
I'm glad you mentioned Ahi Lee. Ahi Lee did her Master of Fine Arts at Notre Dame, and while she was there, she was my assistant for 2 years. But at the time, I don't think I recognized what a gift it was to have her as my assistant for 2 years. I say that as a way to answer the young person or the children part of the question. What I find myself taking more seriously and enjoying more, let's say in the last three years, is my role as a mentor to students, both graduate students, we were talking about Paulina, and undergraduates. And right now, our Latino students, our undocumented students, because we do have them, feel like they're under siege right now. And so I take very seriously and find it a gift to be in a position to offer some mentoring and some support.
Can I just chime in? Oh, we have a question. Yeah.
You want to talk on it? Just for a second. I don't have children, biological children. I have a dog that thinks she's a person. I think she's a person. But I taught for 35 years, and I was a teacher's teacher. I gave everything to my teaching, and through that mentored many young people, many of them young writers. And so I feel it's not the same as my own children, but I often felt like I was nurturing them in that way, and have written poems for many of them, or influenced by them, or in some way they enter the poems, right? So maybe it's their spirit is there, but yeah, I just wanted to contribute that. And
I hear this piece around your daughter and wanting to nurture big rather than small. The way that I grew up, I very much grew up needing to be diminutive, needing to be small. And I have 3 babies, almost 7, almost 5, and just turned 1. And my daughter's in the middle, and that's one of the things I think about all the time, is like, be big. If you want to scream at people because they're crossing your boundaries, great. They need to know. Like, but part of that too is being in deep relationship with the generations behind me, as well as thinking about what's coming. Because my mom is a gerontologist, it's also our family genealogist. She just started a museum in Uniontown called the Fayette County African American History and Cultural Center like a year ago. And part of her work and part of my work in supporting her is doing that deep research into Western Pennsylvania history and the history of Black people in particular, which has been very much erased within that community, and saying, no, we've been here for over 200 years. Actually, my family story goes, received a plot of land from George Washington, and that's actually how my family ended up in this part of the state of a mixed race family. And very much intertwined with the history of that space. That said, in this piece around generations and liberation and deep feeling and complexity is always tied up into the land and digging into the archive of the land and memory, right? So years ago, my mom and I did this research trip because her mother's family is from South Carolina. And we're running around, we're trying to go to cemeteries and find out more information. And we couldn't find this one cemetery that one of my great-greats was buried in. And my mom, takes down the window and she shouts out to the trees we're passing, "This is our land. Our people bled on this land. This is our land." and she's being like big. And I'm next to her, like just offering a silent prayer, like, "Ancestors, we want to know you. Please allow us to know you." And I swear to you, the wind rose up and the trees on this 2-lane dusty highway, they were swaying and the dust was there. And all of a sudden my mom sees this small little sign for Lockhart Baptist Church, which we know from our archival research, one of my great-great-greats happened to have helped to found. And so she's like, "Raina, should I whip this car around?" I was like, "Yeah, mommy, whip that car around." We go like this. And we go and we find all of these folks. Years later, we go back to that church and we see some of my relatives, their names written in the stained glass. Like, how much effort it took for Black people of the early 1900s, late 1800s to have their names written in the stained glass so that we, generations afterwards, could see their names written there and go to their graves and honor them for that. Like, our histories, our work around liberation and living big and laughing and joy practices and preservation. Like, that's archival work, and it's also writing into the archive of the future. And all of that is tied into history and land. So.
The other question, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's, and just being mindful of the time, I think maybe this will be the last question. So, so I just want to take a moment to say, first of all, before we get into this last question, thank you all so very much. This has been incredible, reading and conversation, just all of it. Also, everybody here, please stick around after. There's food, there's drinks, there's amazing company. So if I don't get a chance to say it before now, I want to say it now. So. Yeah.
So thanks very much for this. This is really interesting and in all sorts of ways. So I wanted to ask a question about language and about the relationship between these ideas of displacement that's here, and just make the observation that when most of my students who are Spanish speakers and think that are just simply are Spanish speakers. They're great. Their Spanish is way better than mine, certainly. But they will feel simultaneously a certain amount of pride about heritage and things like that, but also a sense of being apologetic about the quality of their Spanish, right? And that often seems to be connected to some of the experiences of displacement that I think that that you all are talking about in various ways. So the intersection of different Spanish-speaking communities, for instance, and so forth. So, so I would just invite anybody, and I realize this is between us and drinks or something like that. So, so we can keep going with it. But I would. So I wonder who has something interesting to say about
There's
that.
the great poem by J. Michael Martinez in the book, Lord Spanglish Me, which is, I think, speaks to this question. But who wants to?
So I'm not the first generation born here. I'm the second. So it's my grandparents that are coming from Mexico, right? And most of my generation has lost Spanish, right? Mine is a broken Spanish, or I would say, when people talk about what's your first language, I say, well, mine is sort of Inglañol, right, or Spanglish, because we grew up in a house where my aunt and uncle, my aunt was my father is Mexican, my aunt is Mexican, brother and sister, but she married a Yugoslavian, an immigrant from Yugoslavia, what was Yugoslavia, right? And so I heard him too, his accent and although he didn't really speak Slovenian around us, but he had the heavy accent of the Slovenian, right? And he learned some Spanish. It was like, it was all mixed up. Language was all mixed up in my household growing up. And so I would mimic them. So, I want to go to work, and then it would be, sana colita de rana, sanarás hoy, sanarás mañana, and I think for me it's been really important to hold on to as much of the Spanish as I can, even though I don't write a whole lot in pure Spanish, a few poems, but mostly I write in Spanglish, or as you heard, in Inglañol or in English, just to resist, what my cousins did and my brothers did, and to say, no, I heard this language a lot as a child. I'm gonna keep however much of it I can.
I just wanted to say that, Spanish is my first language, and I love practicing Spanish with Spanish speakers. But I really hate the feeling of having lost something in my language. I hate it. And so I don't like that experience. Luckily I can go back to Panama and it comes back after a while, but still, it's just like, I didn't speak really hardly at all for a long time because English is not my first language. I hesitated to become a writer. I didn't feel like I had a right to, because I didn't know the grammar properly and everything else. And I met all these writers that broke grammar, so that gave me some freedom. But, it's just, there's a lot of agony in having lost my language, I think. And partly the reason I write the way I do is I don't write in straightforward English. I write to try to get back to something of what I had. And, so.
I just want to plug this book. It's a colleague of mine from at UWM, Derek Hanley, and the book is called Struggle for the City, Citizenship and Resistance in the Black Freedom Movement. And he talks about Eisenhower and the highway system and the so-called urban renewal and blighting of communities. So Derek is looking at, for my Pittsburgh friend, Derek is looking at 3 cities, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, and St. Paul, and it's a fascinating read. And he talks about what unites African Americans, and he talks about Black rhetorical citizenship and how that gets invested in political organizing, social organizing. For example, in the Hill District, where the great August Wilson grew up, that's where you grew up? I delivered flowers in the Hill District. they didn't have they didn't have a way to get to the hospital, which was just a few miles down the road at the University of Pittsburgh, at Mercy Hospital or Presbyterian Hospital. So in the 50s, these community, through these acts of resistance to the master narrative, created with very forward-looking and public health-minded physicians and nurses in the hospital settings, the first ambulance service. Because before then, they would just throw somebody with a heart attack in the back of the so-called police wagon. Back then they called it a paddy wagon. Or they would call the funeral director to get the limousine to move this sick person. So what Rose says about, that's why I read that poem by Dambera, because many of us, and that's why I talked about displacement, what is Latinx rhetorical citizenship? And part of it may be a resistance to multiple forms of colonization, whether by the Spanish, but even in my own country of origin, in my family story, Ecuador, very indigenous country. Before the Spanish, the Quechua, which is the largest group, or one of the largest indigenous groups, they had conquered the Cañari in Riobamba, where my people are from. And my great-grandmother was able to speak both Quechua and Spanish very well. My great-uncle spoke Quechua, and of course Spanish was his primary language. But so you have then those multiple, and I went to a town in Siksik in southern Ecuador, and it commemorates the pushback and having defeated from Peru these imperial powers in the Quechua nation. So all of these histories are always on top of us, but then it's always, where's home? It's with his father who's trying to understand the poem, and the son wants to try to not just flatten it with the general word blue, but he wants to say añil, cerulio.
Yes.
Maybe we.
Also, Mauricio has a wonderful poem that you can find online called, what is it? When Doña Concepcion, it's called Doña Concepcion and Doña Josefina. No, I'm missing. Give us the title, Mo.
Okay. Doña Concepcion, what is the title, Janet?
Doña Concepcion, entering Sears.
Yeah, counsels Doña Josefina before entering Sears.
Yeah, and it's two women modeled after his mother and the mother's best friend, who are speaking in Spanglish, right, or English, whatever you want. And it's really funny and it's really great, and there's a wonderful video with it. Sorry, Francisco.
No. I just want to piggyback on that by saying that I'm sorry that sometimes you feel that way. What I don't like is, even within our community, sometimes people giving these purity tests that somehow if your Spanish is subpar in what their view is Spanish, that somehow you're less than. I was very privileged, and then I grew up speaking. My mother made the decision not to stop speaking Spanish to us, so my siblings and I all spoke Spanish to our mother, English amongst ourselves, and then I lived in Spain for 10 years and majored in Spanish. But I also recognize that not everybody has that experience and shouldn't be made to feel less than. And if anyone has a desire, that should be enough. But also what you recognize as well, that Spanish is also a colonizer's tongue and shouldn't be put up on a pedestal.
Right, exactly. And somebody else to read, Alyorista. Alyorista is, probably has a poem in there, he has to have. But he was a poet who was writing in the 60s, right? And the 70s too, right? But he would mix not only English and Spanish, but the Nahuatl from Mexico in, and a lot of Nahuatl words, sorry.
So I will offer that I grew up with both languages, primarily English within the academic space and Spanish at home, especially with my grandmother. But most of my productive was Spanglish, and I had a lot of deep-seated anxiety and I'm less than because everything's not pure, right? Like, everything's not perfect. And then I, studied and I remember I went to Spain, I studied abroad, came back, I was like really proud of myself, and I'm talking with my grandmother, and there's no Spanglish, it's all Spanish. And she's like, you go to Spain and then you don't even know how to speak anymore. I was like, damn it. Right, I can't win. So it's like, okay, whatever, we're having a conversation, it's fine. But even this piece, so like my father's people are from Puerto Rico, my mom is African American from Western Pennsylvania, and like some of my peers, Puerto Rico peers, being like, oh, well, you're half. I'm not half a person. Yeah. Like I'm not half a person. So I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Black, like I'm Afro-Latina, like I'm Afro-Boricua. So like I'm not half a person. And so I think that that's also part of the story too, of folks who have multiplicities in their ethnicities and ancestral histories, and like how do you make sense of that, and how do other people make sense of that? And I don't know about your students or those within your community, but I've been asked what I am more often than I would like to be able to say. Instead of like, who am I? No, what are you? As if I'm not a human being, right? And grew up a lot with that. But this piece around Spanish, Spanish was definitely my language of joy and religion and spirituality and food, and these were the things that I really connected with my grandmother in particular around. And then when she died, and everyone, they used to defer to Spanish if she was in the room, but once she was gone, nobody deferred to Spanish anymore. It shifted automatically to English. And so I didn't speak Spanish for years because it had been divorced from that home space and that comfort space, and having anxiety about it when, in my home space, I didn't have to have that. And so it's definitely been more of a struggle for me to actively know that I'm gonna get it wrong and something's wrong. But whatever, like, it's fine. And I don't know about y'all, but like, I have a dream like 3 weeks later of like, oh, I should have used the subjunctive in that case. Like, really, like they got my sense, it's fine. But I very rarely write in Spanish only. Spanglish is more common. And there are still words that I struggle with in English, like it doesn't have the right sense. And so there are still times where my own writing in prose as well as in poetry has words in Spanish because that's the only one that actually carries the meaning that I want to carry. But I offer that to others too, of the transparency of this story, saying like, you don't have to be ashamed of who you are, or that like things aren't perfect. Nobody's English is perfect if that's your primary language. Like, nothing is perfect. It's all about communicating and connecting with people, right? So.
When you talk about that impossibility of translation too, I can't help but think of Francisco X again, who has that wonderful poem where there's a line, un beso is not a kiss, right? Because there's just a different sense in one language, right? The way I understand him is there's a lot more to that beso, right? But that's cultural, so. Yeah.
Beso is imitated. It is kissing while you say the word beso.
Yeah, that's true. You're kissing your lips.
Is it time?
Oh yeah, we should eat
Yeah, we could just talk and talk. We could just talk forever. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you so much.